Great to meet everybody. My name is Joni Brennan. I am the president of the Digital ID and Authentication Council of Canada, the DIACC. We are an organization that is focused on unlocking all of the economic opportunities and benefits using tools like digital wallets, digital credentials, and particularly capabilities around identity verification. So that is, who is this person? Who is this business or organization? So that kind of layer of verification and the importance that it provides in fighting fraud, and helping to secure commerce and making customer experiences delightful, and also kind of managing and mitigating risk within and throughout our ecosystem. So the more that we do as partners to mitigate and reduce risk, the more that we fight fraud and make it easier for the customers who are transacting to be able to transact securely. So this group, we've got a great discussion set up today. I think I'll make another note as well. It's always a wonderful opportunity when we get to extend the learning and the knowledge around topics like digital trust, verification, credentials, all these types of capabilities out into the communities who are the beneficiaries, who are out on the front lines of transacting with customers and with partners, and particularly in the financial ecosystem. So it's a great opportunity to connect an audience who may not be experts in this field and get an opportunity to kind of share that information and connect knowledge with folks who have different degrees of expertise, who have kind of just come into the field, all the way to folks who've been in the field for 20 years or more. So it's all about connecting our opportunities and working to support our economy here in Canada to grow business opportunities in and around finance and beyond. So with that, I think we have all of our folks here today, and I think I can hand over to our guests. So who's starting for our speakers today?
We have the delightful Anne-Marie Kelly. Hello, Anne-Marie.
Hello, everyone. Thanks, Joni and Chris. Folks, I am actually going to go off camera. My bandwidth, thank you, technology is not terrific, and I want to be able to deliver the messages that I've prepared for you today. So notwithstanding that, Chris is actually going to share a couple of slides and talk us through. So I'll ask for everybody's patience as I ask him to click through to the next slide. So first of all, so identity risk and fraud in automotive retail, this is why we're here. Just to level set too, this discussion, this webinar is really intended for the folks who are in the dealerships. So our sales folks, our F&I managers, our dealer principals, general managers, the people who are in front of the consumers all day and every day. I realize that we've got a great population of lenders and other vendors here. Today, we're not going to discuss necessarily the FinTrack rules that have come down April 1st. We will touch on it a little bit, but I want to make sure that today we really focus on the dealers and the dealer principals and the folks who are actually working within the dealerships. So with that, let's get started. Next slide. So what this session is today and what it's not, to be clear. So today it's all about an introductory to identity fraud in automotive finance, how to recognizing it in sales and in the F&I office. I'm going to talk to you about emerging fraud trends and tactics, and so are our panel speakers. Best practices for prevention, detection, and responses when you are sitting actually in front of a customer or an applicant. And I always find that when I'm at sessions or seminars, having some actionable insights that I can actually take away and start to think about and to incorporate into my day-to-day is always helpful. So we're going to try and help you guys out with that as well. And again, just general awareness focused around the reduction of risk exposure where identity fraud is prevalent. So today, what it's not, we're not going to get into deep technical tutorials about the LOS or portals. We're not going to talk about legal advice or how to prosecute or when to make arrests or when actually to call law enforcement to make arrests. We're not going to do step-by-step software training. We're not going to talk about any really unrelated fraud types that are happening in Canada and beyond that's not having anything to do with digital identity. This is not a replacement for formal compliance compliance and regulatory training. I know that I talked a little bit about FinTrack, but I'm sure that we will have subsequent webinars that will follow on that will talk specifically where our audience are leasing partners in finance within the automotive sector. And this is by no means a blame focus session on who is in front of the customer or the applicant, who submitted the deal, who didn't. We're not going to get into that either. And I would encourage all of us not to get into that, because this is an ecosystem that we're all part of, and we all contribute to the fight against identity crimes in the digital space and beyond. Next slide. All right, so I thought I'd level set really with what is identity fraud. If you just click once here, Chris. So this is my definition. There are lots of definitions if you get into a ChatGPT or even you look at it on the internet, but basically it is the act of using another person's personal data without the knowledge or consent to perpetrate a crime. Types specifically that we'll talk about today are first party fraud. So this is really where Anne-Marie, we really see this in the income space where Anne-Marie is maybe inflating my income in order to get that vehicle across. Synthetic fraud is rising. So what that is basically where perpetrators are stealing all of our pieces of our identity, and they're gluing pieces of identity together to make an identity that doesn't exist. So for example, they may use Pulkit's first name, use Lee's address, they'll use Chris's date of birth, they'll use my social insurance number, they'll use Joni's phone number, and they will create an identity specifically with Equifax or TransUnion, and that's really where the party starts as far as synthetic IDs go. They are rising, and they are rising concerns because there's not a person to identify behind that identity, and so therefore it's really hard to catch somebody perpetrating synthetic crimes and to bring them to our judicial system. And then third-party fraud. So everybody in the middle who are acting on behalf. So mule people, this might be an example of somebody who is paid to walk into a dealership actually and apply for a loan using their identity, but they're actually not going to be the ones that drive away with the vehicle. So there's all different types of fraud that we'll talk about today. Click again. So lots of different ways to perpetrate identity crimes. And again, there are sessions beyond DIACC, within DIACC, on what do all of these different methods mean. I think that we're all pretty familiar with phishing. Phishing actually would be the text or the emails that you get. Click here to accept your Interact e-transfer when you're not actually looking for an e-transfer. Data breaches. So data breaches have become really prevalent and more awareness around them. Our government has gotten involved, and there's reporting requirements now for entities when there are data breaches. But I would offer that data breaches are probably the #1 way that all of our identities are being used for the purposes of identity crimes. Phishing, straw buyers, again, so straw buyers is like somebody who is not actually it's not their identity. Basically, I may ask a friend or a colleague or maybe a homeless person to walk into a dealership and apply for a vehicle. There are fake IDs. We're going to talk a lot about that today. In session, non-face-to-face and in person. And so on the panel discussion, Lee Pulkit and Justin are going to specifically talk about what is the difference between non-face-to-face and in person when it comes to identity crimes. I'm going to click again. And so really, why are these criminals targeting auto? I would offer that this is not new. What I would offer, though, is that in the past, you can click one more time. In the past, the lenders really, or the finance companies, have been storing away all the losses, maybe buried or hidden in their credit losses, but these losses really have not come to the awareness of the dealership themselves. And so while I would say that identity crimes have been in the auto space, it's really coming to rise now because both the lenders and the auto finance companies are waking up, I guess, if you will, and holding dealerships accountable. So again, why? Because look, I mean, at the end of the day, vehicles are high target or high ticket items that can be resold domestically and exported. We've seen a lot of that in the news, and criminals see cars as liquid assets, much like cash, but easier to disguise in a supply chain. If you click again. Weaker fraud defenses again. So historically, again, this sector relies on trust, relies on face-to-face transactions. Consumers typically, before COVID, want to come in and smell the leather. They want to, smell that new car. They want to touch it. They want to drive it. And so again, I would say banks, telcos, government have invested heavily in identity verification and fraud detection, but dealerships have historically relied on physical or manual identity checks and credit bureaus to confirm the validity of identities, which actually is easier to bypass with today's high quality forgeries and synthetic identities. So the point there is that I would say that the auto industry is heavily reliant on what I would call credit first financing, where the dealerships F&I managers are relying on the signals coming back from the bureaus to validate an identity. So whether that's a credit score, whether that is in the STIPs for income. And so it is down the funnel, basically, traditionally, where auto dealerships are relying on other means to validate an identity. Click again, Chris. Shifting to digital and to remote sales. So we all remember COVID, and we all remember COVID accelerated the online pre-approvals, digital credit apps, and remote non-face-to-face interactions. And this opened up a whole new threat vector for this sector. And so there are organizations out there that you can now purchase vehicles without even going into a store. It really opened up an opportunity for fraudsters, for criminals, to penetrate this industry even more, and being faceless at the same time. Like again. Leasing and financing incentives. Again, so when we look at what's happening behind the scenes as well. So economic times, if we look around even at our colleagues, our family, things are just generally more expensive. We talk a lot about groceries, housing, the crisis that Canada and really the globe is in. And that all impacts not only the finance companies, but other sectors, the auto sector, but also other sectors as well. So when we start thinking about the incentives to consumers, really there is a lot of incentives to financing, to bringing those identities into the ecosystem, harvesting those identities again. And I'll talk a little bit about how that is perpetrated with the credit bureaus and other organizations. Click again. Regulatory pressure gap. So again, this is the only time I think I'll talk about FinTrack. I may surprise myself, but the regulatory pressures of the banks, who are called reporting entities, are getting stronger and stronger. And so the regulators, FinTrack in this case, Department of Finance, have put high obligations on reporting entities that include leasing finance companies, banks who have been regulated for a long time. That starts to put pressure on the dealerships as well, as the lenders have these obligations for proceeds of crime, anti-money laundering, and know your customer requirements. Those requirements are getting pushed down to the dealers in ways that dealerships have not seen before. Again, so why target auto? Because it is a highly lucrative sector where one sale of a vehicle can sometimes, if that goes rogue or goes bad, sometimes some of these independents are shut down as a result of it. So again, these regulatory pressure gaps that are coming from not only regulators, but also the banks who are funding these deals certainly are creating loopholes for the dealerships to get deals through faster. And again, organized crime and export networks. So again, organized crime, they will find, if we think about the analogy of water in the cracks. And so if you have sandbags around a house and the water in a flood just keeps getting higher and higher and higher, eventually that water is going to go to the cracks where there's no sandbags. Organized crime does the same thing. Trait and expose those cracks. And so the former bullet points expose some opportunities for organized crime to weave their ways into the auto sector, and the export networks as well. I mean, we've seen in the news that vehicle thefts are decreasing in Canada, which is a good sign. but also it's an opportunity again for the rise of education to those in the dealerships of the ease by which these vehicles are being obtained and then for the sale or for the export out of Canada, again, to perpetrate money laundering and to fund financial crimes and other heinous crimes themselves. So in short, here's the wrapper around that slide. Dealers are attractive because of a few things. Number one, the high value assets. If you can just go back one more slide. High value assets, generally weaker controls, again, in an analog system where manual identity verification, looking at a driver's license has always been the method. And so using technology to identify anomalies in identities have not been used very much in this sector. Growing digital channels, again, reminds us of COVID and us as consumers being pushed or wanting to go into the digital channels. And again, delayed regulatory coverage. Now you can go to the next slide, Chris. So here's some common red flags that I would offer everyone to sort of have a think about. Again, whether or not you're actually in the dealership or whether you're a consumer going into an automotive dealer and the way that you behave. And so I would say, then means, probably a year, maybe 2 years, and prior to that. Typically, when we saw these red flags, they were behaviors that a salesperson, an F&I manager, or those who are working in a dealership would have extra and would have processes around what to do. And so rushed buyer, right? Somebody coming in and they want to buy that, that luxury vehicle and at whatever cost. Doesn't matter what you throw at them, they're going to buy it all. And so that might be a red flag. Evasive about their personal details as well. So again, and some of this also carries forward into today's world as well. But when somebody doesn't want to give their email or somebody doesn't want to give their income, or these are all sort of red flags that I hear time and time again from sales folks. It's just that gut feeling that they get that something is wrong. Focus on an approval, but not a vehicle. So again, looking to get that pre-approval, not necessarily again, and that could be them shopping around. But again, I'm not saying that any of these are onto themselves or single points of red flags. But when you start to combine some of these behaviors, one might think, oh, I'm getting my spidey senses up that something might be wrong. I would say that, look, in the past, we paid a lot of attention to applicants who were in the subprime, near prime market as being higher risk to perpetrate identity crimes. And again, I'm not talking about credit decisions, I'm talking identity crimes. Why? Because this generally was a population that could be coerced into perpetrating crimes for a small payment, coerced into selling their identity for a larger payment. Coercion often happened typically in these types of credit populations. You'll see on the next slide that is quickly changing. And then again, largely handled face-to-face during the buying process again. So I would look to say that this is a sector that has prided itself on that personal touch into, again, looking and seeing how the buyer is reacting, touching paper, looking at identity, really sort of, I would call that as the analog process. When we look to now, so I would say probably in the last 24 months, some of those behaviors are changing. Why are they changing? They're changing because consumers have been pushed into the digital channel. So of course they're going to change. We're not going to have the opportunity necessarily to watch somebody across a desk and how they are acting. But I think that there are certain red flags that we can be aware of. And again, in isolation may not be enough for anyone to raise the red flag that somebody might be rogue or somebody might be a perpetrator of identity crime sitting in front of you, but certainly these are just flags that you should consider. So number one, again, relaxed buyer, no cues. And I'm sure all of you on this call right now are saying like, no kidding, like that's certainly not a red flag. But again, when that is combined with some of these other red flags, look, the criminals know exactly the dealerships that have sort of the analog processes. They know the dealerships that can push through deals very quickly. And they themselves, the criminals have well-organized networks and they talk. And so just like we do in legit business, just like we're having this webinar, they also have webinars on how to perpetrate these crimes, where to get the identity, how much they need to pay, who are the dealerships that are easier to scam, and that alike. They provide a lot of details. They over provide details, even details that not necessarily the F&I manager or the salesperson is asking for. They are focused on approval versus the vehicle again. So pre-quals, I see a lot of cases in customers and non-customers where in the digital space, apps are wanting that pre-qualification. They're doing it remotely. Again, I think we will talk about this in the panel. They'll do it all remote. Number one, to pass the identity, and number two, to understand where they qualify and who is going to qualify them in order to get that car. So be cognizant of people that are coming in through non-face-to-face and getting pre-qualified and asking a lot of questions before they come in the dealership. Credit score is prime plus anything. We are seeing credit scores that are 800s, 850s, high 700s that typically would have no verification, typically fly through, again, because that's traditionally been a sector of folks that are, a good credit risk, but also not at risk of perpetrating identity crime. Again, just because you have a score of 850 or 800 or 750 does not necessarily mean that the person sitting across from you is perpetrating identity crimes. I would say I alluded to this at leave text or email. I'm seeing a lot of this, and I thought that this was relevant because I probably 2 months I've heard cases of this probably on a weekly basis now, where the communications start remotely. They upload all of their identity.
Okay.
Hi, folks. I'm back.
Okay,
I just
Anne-Marie.
wanted everybody to miss me. If
We
you,
did.
thank you. If you can actually just go to the next slide. So there are hotspots basically in your sales journey. And we have 2 more slides, and then I'm going to hand it over to the panel. What I would call them as your sales journey. I alluded earlier to credit first financing, and that's typically, again, in this analog space where, just as a reminder, sales folks, F&I managers really depend on the information that they're getting back from the credit bureaus in order to validate the identity or the identity of the person sitting in front of them. I would offer that that is too late in the funnel. And why? It's because if we do have fictitious identities, then that identity actually is getting into our ecosystem by that simple credit inquiry. What I would offer for those of us who are in dealerships is looking at doing that identity verification at the first point of opportunity that you're meeting, and I say that in air quotes, the applicant. So that's at pre-qualification, that's at test drive. Too often, so my husband is retirement law enforcement with anti-rackets, and all too many times the OPP now are going out to dealerships and they're saying, like, look, there is a safety about having somebody who is going out for a test drive, and actually cases of where sales folks are actually put in danger. And so I would ask, this great opportunity actually to do your identity verification from a safety standpoint, but also, before you get too far down the funnel, where the operational expenses and the costs associated to doing other forms of verification, when we start getting into the application, we want to know that what we're putting into that system, into our financial ecosystem, are good identity. So I would offer move your identity verification up the funnel, either to a pre-qual or a test drive, certainly before it goes into the portal or the LOS systems. I would also say too, again, time and time again, I hear cases of where signals of identity verification have come back as reject or red flags. And oftentimes our sales folks, look, they're incentivized to sell. They're not incentivized to look for fraud or to look for criminals that may be sitting in front of them. And so I hear many times where there are signals there that the identity may be tampered with. And, look, these criminals are very good at tugging at our heartstrings and giving lots of different types of scenarios as to why their face doesn't look like the face in the driver's license or in their passport or whatever type of photo ID that you're accepting. And so where we've been able to catch literally cars that are in transit in delivery because the signals weren't picked up on. And so we'll talk at the next slide, there's really three things that I would like everybody to be thinking about, and that's people, process, and technology. Technology, you can't have people doing identity verification onto them like they're by themselves. Chris, you can go to the next slide. By themselves. And we're seeing the effects of this, that manual looking at a driver's license. Does it look like the person standing in front of you? Yes, but how do you know that that driver's license hasn't been tampered with? With AI, machine learning, it's very easy to do. You can't have technology without the people that are running the technology. And certainly you can't have people technology without process. And so I would encourage everybody to be looking at the technology, the ID verification, in order to identify whether or not that person is either, is who they say they are, using AI, using a reputable vendor, and then training the people. It's not just a one and done, it is ongoing training with these threat vectors, and then creating really good processes for our sales folks on what to do if they do come across some of those red flags, their spidey senses or their stomach tells them that something is wrong. So technology, people, and process, it's a trifecta that I would encourage everybody to be thinking about for an effective fraud program. Next slide, Chris. And then lastly, takeaways, and then I'm going to hand it over to Justin, Lee, and to Pulkit. So look, fraud is here to stay. Ignoring puts your dealership at risk. We have seen independents actually close their doors because the banks are unwinding deals, and these deals are significant. Don't rely on the outdated tactics. Again, that manual looking at identity, is this the person standing in front of you? Start to incorporate technology into your processes. Again, combine people, process, and technology. And look, protect the access to your capital, which is not only the money and the floor plans, but your capital and your people. And most importantly, your customer as well, or just as importantly, I should say. And to stay ahead as fraud threats evolve. So look to partners to help you keep ahead of the fraud tactics that are happening out there. Attend webinars like this. Look to DIACC as being a source of information for you. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Justin and to Pulkit and to Lee to talk about real world experiences from our experts there.
Great. Thank you so much, Anne-Marie. Good stuff. Justin, Lee, and Pulkit. There you go. Over to you guys. Maybe start with some introductions and get into things. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, let's go. So I will just kick it off. I'm Justin Gage, independent advisor. Been part of DIACC for almost a decade now, and here to kind of facilitate the conversation here, kind of following on from where Anne-Marie left off, and really kind of continue here with our local esteemed experts, Lee Day from Yodi Canada, and Pulkit Aurora from Dabadoo Inc. So why don't I let you guys introduce yourselves?
Yeah, hi everybody. Lee Day, based in Vancouver. I basically help a number of companies with digital ID solutions and services and advising, but I represent Yoti Canada. I've been with Yoti about 7 years, and I'm also quite active in DIACC. I chair one of the special committees, and I'll pass it over to Pulkit.
Awesome. Thanks, Lee. Pulkit Aurora, founder and CEO of Dabadoo. We are raised here on a platform that powers automotive. Prior to starting Dabadoo, I spent my last decade working on AI, ML, and blockchain.
All right, great. Thank you. So we've just spent a lot of time hearing from Anne-Marie about what fraud in dealerships really looks like, how the economic pressure has evolved over time. There's been a lot of technology advancements and things like fake or synthetic identities. She talked a bit about how to look out for red flags and escalate when they're spotted. So I wanted to start with a quick piece here just to kind of level set what we're looking at going through today, and really what our objective is for everyone coming out of this. It's kind of three key main things. One is really there's no more what if scenarios. There's very clearly real fraud risk. It's been observed, it's been identified, and that's continuing to rise. We expect it to continue to rise. And as Anne Marie said, this is actually one of my main points here, oddly enough, but people, process, and technology is key. So technology helps us keep a step ahead of fraudsters. Um, sort of the people, frontline staff, their awareness of these different tactics and any training that they might need, and standard process around sort of inconsistencies, the red flags that Anne-Marie mentioned, any escalation they might need to take. Those are all critical. It's not just, technology is not the only solution here. And then lastly, DIACC's really here to lead and help. DIACC and their members have been tackling challenges with identity verification, fraud prevention, in making better customer experience for quite some time now. So we understand where to help through the retail industry, auto retail industry, and we've developed some auditable rules, process, and procedure for digital trust and identity verification solutions. So wanted to start with that, just kind of that level set. That's what we're looking to kind of focus on in this conversation. So we'll jump right in, and we're going to start by talking about a little bit more about the real fraud risks that you guys are seeing, you're dealing with. As Anne-Marie said, the cyber attacks are changing pretty fast, and fraudsters are kind of quick to keep up. So it's not really any more about if, but when there's these attacks. So can you give us some examples, Pulkit, maybe about things you've been seeing this year where fraudsters have shifted their approaches, or where you're seeing that evolution happening?
Sure. And Justin, you're absolutely right. It's not about if, but when. And what we're seeing now is the fraudsters are no longer random and sloppy. It's being now more industrialized, and they've become very professionals. What we're seeing is we don't see just those fake plastic IDs. What we are seeing more of, and I know Anne-Marie kind of alluded to that before, is the synthetic IDs. They have now become mainstream. Now, synthetic IDs are created by combining or blending the data from real world, like a real SIM card information or real credit informations, now mixed with fabricated details to now create those near perfect IDs, which are now presented at the dealerships. And things that we talked about, these old styles where these IDs were created by a kid in the garage, but these things have now become professionals. Now there are processes in place, they have stencils, and they're able to produce not one or two, they're able to produce hundreds of IDs in a matter of days, right? And that's what we're seeing now. Those IDs are being sold and are getting reused at dealerships. What we are seeing is when the fraudsters are in the traditional times, even cyber attacks times, they were trying to do this behind a screen, right? They're trying to do it on a keyboard, they're behind the screens, they're protected. But what we are seeing now is they've gone bold. They are walking into these dealerships, and not just one dealerships, they're trying to target a bunch of the dealerships within the same area. We actually had one of these cases where we had a customer buy a car, put a deposit down in North York, then went in and put another one down in Markham, and finally the one down in Barrie. Luckily, he got arrested in Barrie, but that's what we're seeing. They're not just limiting to one dealership. They're going across to multiple dealerships and try to target the one dealerships that are just going to let it pass through and going to get them the car. So if I say one thing from what we are seeing now, especially this year, is the hybrid approach. They're no longer just online or in persons, they're doing both. They're mixing up the online journey, and they're also coming down to physical dealerships, which makes it very difficult to differentiate between a fraud customers versus a real customers. And before I pass it on to Lee, I think the big takeaway from this point for us would be fraud has now become a business, right? They're trying to make it scalable, automated, and they're persistent about it. And we need to do the same to combat fraud itself. Over to you, Lee.
Yeah, I agree with everything you just said, Pulkit. I think Justin's going to switch focus a little bit here to different fraud vectors.
Yeah, so just kind of following up on that thread there. Basically, kind of, we heard you already talk about it a little bit. There's a lot of different types of fraud and different vectors. It's no longer just a kid in a garage with an X-Acto knife. So those things were fairly easy to spot with the human eye. Now, digital document fraud is just much more sophisticated. It's repeatable at scale. So Lee, why don't you can you tell us a little bit more about the differences in attack vectors you're seeing, as well as kind of the differences between in person, as Polka said, these criminals are brazen. They walk in and they still expect they can get away with it, versus sort of the remote in person, the remote experience, which we've all seen explode, in the last several years.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll try to simplify this. So a little later, I'll talk in a bit more detail about how we do remote identity verification. But most of you will be acutely aware that remote identity verification is very often founded in a combination of a credential and a biometric. So in simple terms, that's a driving license in the audience's world, and a selfie. A facial biometric, that's a selfie. And so most often that's what we see. Government photo ID and a selfie is what we use to establish somebody's identity. Now, the attack vectors for those two halves, the document and the face, are different. And the emphasis of those attack vectors shifts whether you're dealing with a remote transaction or an in-person or in-dealership transaction. So if we first talk about the remote scenario, that could be where somebody's applying for a loan online, or maybe they're booking a test drive online, or maybe they've seen a vehicle they are interested in purchasing and they do some sort of pre-qualification online, and they present an image of their face and their document. We're worried very much about attack vectors on both halves of that. With the face, we're not meeting the person in person. So we don't actually know if there's a real human carbon-based life form behind the camera. And these threat vectors on faces have got much more concerning in recent years, because it wasn't that long ago that what we saw was people holding up a picture of somebody else to the camera, or perhaps wearing a latex mask so that maybe I can look like Justin. These attack vectors were pretty easy. ID companies got better and better at detecting them, and they were limited. If I want to look like Justin in particular, because I've stolen his document, that's one mask I have to wear, and I can attack one lender or one dealership at a time. But what we've seen these days is software broadly available on the internet. You can download for a couple $100. You can use a gaming laptop or something to do really sophisticated deepfake videos and face swaps. You've probably seen these in the news. So we've evolved techniques to detect and defeat those. And then on the document side, as Justin just said, you have this image of a teenager with an X-Acto knife fiddling with a plastic ID so they can get into a bar or something if they're underage. That can still happen. Physical fake documents or genuine plastic documents that have been altered do exist, and that is a common attack vector. But you can also create a completely synthetic document that doesn't actually exist, and you can provide an image of that. With that, you can change the document subtly numerous ways. We've seen attack vectors where the same essential document with the same face on it had different names, different date of birth, different document numbers. So what we can do is analyze the images and the features on the document that's presented very carefully to detect if it's physical or if it's a synthetic fake or a physical fake document. So that's the remote scenario. Now, if the person is in dealership, standing in front of you, you're pretty sure they're a real person. It's unlikely you wouldn't notice if they were wearing a mask, but there's still benefit to using this technology. A couple of reasons why would be humans aren't the best at comparing faces. If somebody's grown a beard or they're wearing glasses and they're not on their ID, you might actually struggle to figure out if it's the same person. Maybe it's the person's brother or cousin, they look similar. So algorithms are much better at making sure that the face standing in front of them is the face on the document. So it's well worth doing the selfie and scanning the document. Another reason would be dealership staff may be trained on what to look at on a driving license, but probably not. They're probably not experts on document authenticity. So again, capturing a picture of the document allows us to do that. And it also allows us to analyze features like the barcodes on the back. And lots of good ID verification companies, certainly Yoti and others do this, will maintain a database of known fraudulent documents. So when we see scenarios where gangs come into an area and attack numerous dealerships at the same time, once we catch a fake document the first time, we can flag it quickly so that if it's presented again, it's just automatically rejected. Back to you, Justin.
Just on that, sorry, just one
Yeah,
second.
no, sure. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say,
Yeah.
just to Lee's point, I think the fraudsters are also playing different playbooks, right? So they have a different playbook when they're trying to reach dealerships online versus face to face. Like what we're seeing online, especially, is scale, right? They're able to produce hundreds of IDs, synthetic IDs, and they're able to submit applications to multiple dealers on a click of a button. They built automations to be able to do that. They're able to do this at scale, and that's where dealerships needs to be also be able to handle these things at scale. When it comes down to in person, we are not seeing the scales. We're not seeing hundreds of leads being created or people just walking through the door. But we are seeing is the other side of it is even though the volume is less, the risk is higher because when they do walk into the dealership, they do present those fake IDs, and if they're able to get through it, they're just rolling with the car. You're losing tens of thousands of dollars. So we have to kind of balance both things out. We have to build tools, and the dealerships needs to build a layer to handle both a high volume and a high impact fraud. And regardless of which one is which, I think having a digital checks in place just builds that little layer of prevention that could protect you in either scenarios. Sorry, over to you, Justin.
No, that's fine. Yeah, no, that's super helpful, obviously, to understand the difference between the two, different vector sort of attack surfaces. I think it's good to keep in mind. It feels like we've been talking, Anne-Marie, and these first couple of questions, it's been a lot of doom and gloom. Like, I feel like I'm in the Wizard of Oz, like lions and tigers and bears, oh my. But I think what we're all seeing and why we're all excited about this is there are a lot of opportunities. There's really some benefits for digital enablement that are really quite significant, and maybe in some cases in not just auto retail businesses, but many organizations, industries, sectors where like manual processing or paper or really people reliant businesses may not have always kept up, or there just wasn't the sophistication of tools and software. So basically what I'd like to talk a little bit more about now is when you introduce new process or technology, there's often a lot of concerns that it makes everyone's lives harder or takes longer. But we're seeing that despite those kind of early hesitations, we have a lot of positive enhancements in customer experience or operational efficiency or process improvement. So can you talk a little, maybe we'll start with Pulkit, talk a little bit about sort of the improvements in identity verification, document checking, digital fraud prevention, things like that. So where are those benefits that you're seeing coming out?
Yeah, no, definitely. And I know, like, we talk about introducing new processes, and the first human nature is like, okay, if you're going to introduce something new, it's going to slow things down. But digital identity tools are actually helping you improve the process. The process was very manual before, and now we're seeing the automated version of it where the customers are able to take a selfie, scan a document, and a minute later, their identities are verified. They're no longer waiting for these manual processes to be completed. And for dealership staff, they're heavily focused now on sales. Previously, they're spending time looking for a fake ID, trying to understand if this is a real customer or not, and losing that momentum to actually focus on sale. And from a dealership or a dealer group perspective, I think the benefit we are seeing is the reduction in charge-offs. Right now that you're doing this process upfront, it's done digitally. The chances, the risk of charge-offs or a write-off has reduced significantly, right? And those are the benefits we're kind of seeing at a dealership or a dealer group level. But even from a customer perspective, beyond just the ease of using the IDs, I think it builds the trust, right? One of the things we talked about in the podcast too was I myself as a customer sometimes don't feel comfortable about my IDs just floating around near the printer or under the reception's desk. Now, seeing that I'm in control of my data, I'm the one taking the picture, I'm the one taking the selfies, the data retention policies are explicitly mentioned, and it gives me the comfort saying, okay, I can actually securely do business with this dealerships because they have tools in place. And just to kind of bring one of the examples that we noticed, we did a pilot with one of the dealer groups for that are on a platform, And we built it as, to Anne-Marie's point, very early in their journey itself. It was part of the first two automations that go out. And we saw different metrics. About 18% of the people completed their IDV within the 4 hours of submitting their applications. And this is before they even had a conversations with a sales rep, right? It may not look like a bigger number, but that's 18% less verifications they have to have a conversation with people to do. And you're getting the data upfront. People are okay to do it. So they're not hesitant to do it. And again, repeating to some of the things we talked about in podcast, I think it really goes down to balance. I think what we could offer is the balance between convenience and protection. And I think digital enablement just does that for us. It brings that balance out.
Great. Lee, I want to give you a chance to add in, but I want to remind everybody that we do have 10 minutes left at the end. We had allocated at the end for questions. We haven't seen a lot come in. We've got one that we'll come to in a minute. So Saritha, I see your question there. But just want to remind everyone, if you have questions, if anything's like popping up throughout the discussion, trust me, we can probably talk about this stuff all day. You don't want us to, but with the 10 minutes left, if we don't get other questions, then, we have a few other topics that we had prepared to kind of go through. So Lee, I'll let you finish off, following up from, anything else you wanted to add about the benefits of digital, and then we'll maybe take a few minutes to go into, sort of an overview of how the process actually works.
Yeah, I mean, briefly, just to follow on from what Pulkit said, this process of taking a selfie and uploading a document is pretty well understood. Lots of people have done it to travel or to open a bank account. It's a familiar ceremony. It's easy to do. It takes, usually 45 to 60 seconds. As Pulkit said, there's very high completion rates or success rates. It is effective at detecting fake people and fake documents. And importantly, it's very equitable and accessible. It's easy for people with, any kind of, or lots of different types of impairments to do. It's designed to be usable by people with even visual impairments or movement disorders or cognitive problems. It's very equitable in terms of outcome. These solutions are measured regularly to make sure that there's no bias for ethnicity, skin tone, gender, that sort of thing. And you can also be sure that the data from a reputable provider is encrypted, and it also preserves privacy. As Pulkit said, no pictures of IDs left lying around. And also we can allow the relying party to minimize the data they receive. So you don't necessarily need to know somebody's eye color or weight in order to know that it's safe to sell a car to them. So there's lots of other benefits to it as well.
You might not even actually need to know their address in some cases, but anyway, that's another different point. Okay, so then the next thing I wanted to have you kind of address, Lee, and just cognizant of time, we got about 7 minutes left. It'd be great if you can give us kind of the quick overview of how the photo ID and selfie matching works. How do you make sure it's the real person, the right person in an authentic document? And then we'll come to the question that we've got in the chat so far, and then we'll go from there. We'll see how much time we have left.
Yeah, so super quick overview. For any of you that have done this process where you take a selfie and scan your ID, what's happening under the cover? So very briefly, with the document, we're doing two things. We're extracting the data and returning it to you, and that can be minimized, but we can return to you what you need. And we're verifying the authenticity of the document. How do we do that? Many ways. We recognize the document template. We can read the information on the document. We can decode machine readable features like barcodes and hash numbers. And we can look at security features like microfonts, holograms, ghost images. We can spot where somebody's changed the picture on a document. We can tell if it's a live document or if it's on a screen or a photocopy or something like that. So with the document, it's extracting the data, checking the authenticity. With the person, there's two things we're interested in. Are they a real live human in front of the camera right now? Not a mask, not somebody holding up a picture of somebody else, not a deep fake video that somebody's generated. And then secondly, does the face in the selfie match the face on the credential in the portrait on the credential? So those are the four things that we're doing. We've been doing this a long time, and it works, and it's reliable, and it's effective, and also easy to implement. By the way, there's lots of vendors you can choose from, and it's cost effective and easy to implement.
Yeah, it's a good segue into reminding everybody. I think one point in the middle, while we were waiting for Anne-Marie to come back, and maybe at the beginning, there is a website, or a portion of the DIACC website. It's DIACC, DIACC.ca. Chris will keep me honest and put, there it is, /auto-dealers. So for information about, things that are going on, other information that DIACC's posting, including sort of I imagine, this webinar and the information that comes out of it, as well as a mini podcast and some other sort of information pieces and vendors that you can kind of go look and talk to that are members and have been doing this for a while. So we've got a couple of quick things I'd like to address in the chat. I think one that Saritha had asked about voice biometrics as identity verification, and as Steve kind of pointed out a little bit here, the reality sometimes of voice is you need something to compare it against, and maybe sometimes it's the first time that dealership might be interacting with that customer. So just curious, Pulkit or Lee, if you have any sort of quick thoughts on voice. We have 4 minutes left.
Yeah, I think I was going to say, I think our friend Steve may have posted his thoughts on that in the chat in response. But voice authentication is subject to attack vectors, just like documents and faces. So I know some of the banks have stopped using it for that reason. Not sure if Pulkit has anything to add.
Yeah, I was just going to say, we are going to see a lot of that happen in coming future too. I think like lenders, we are also going to tap into alternative data. Voice may become an addition to it, but I still believe for the foreseeable futures, we are going to see the physical ID and the face match being the prominent ones, with voice becoming the alternative data that we could tap into to really build that extra layer.
Great. So we've got one more question, but it looks like we've got a pretty decent answer from Anne-Marie. If we get a little bit of time at the end, maybe we'll come back to that. I have 2 other quick things that I'd like us to try to wrap up before we get to another minute of closing, which is not much time, but basically really what I'd like to close out is, right, so we've talked a lot about what are the challenges, what are the opportunities. It may not be easy, but we can do this. There's definitely ways to make it better, and really, what are some practical steps to improve on today's sort of current environment? But the last kind of point here that I think is important for us to leave people with, and maybe some of those on the webinar call today are wondering, is how do I get started? We talked about people, process, technology. And so this is great, but for someone who might be starting from scratch or bare bones, maybe very paper-based, it could be daunting. So I'd probably be asking myself, where do I start? But is there some practical steps that we can suggest to get started beyond just go find these vendors? What's really the first point that people should be thinking about? Is it process? Is it how do they train their people? What do you think?
Yeah, I'll jump into that one. I think it goes in the same order, right? I know you talk about people, process, technology. If I were to give an advice, I'll say follow the same order. Invest in your people, train your people first, train them to spot fake IDs. And from there, you start looking into building this into processes. How to escalate when you see something. And already kind of alluded to that before, that we have people who may just look the other way when they see one flag come up, right? How do we build this escalation metrics? And also the part of the process then becomes the technology, right? What you want to do is you want to pick a partner, you want to bring the partners in that complements your process. Because the last thing you want to do is now change the entire process to be able to accommodate technology. Technology should accommodate to your process, not the other way around. So if I have to leave with one thing, I would just say choose people first, then establish the process, and then find a technology partner that complements the two, but keep investing in your people.
Great, absolutely. Lee, any thoughts to add, or should
I think the first step, just to re-emphasize this, I'm hoping that for everybody attending the call, if you remember only one thing from this presentation, which we hope was helpful, is bookmark that page that Chris put in the chat, because that's really your first step. That it's a living resource. DIACC will be putting lots more information there. And for somebody, running a dealership, wondering, this is all very confusing. How on earth do I do what I need to do, or do what lenders require me to do? Go look at that page, and over time it will become very clear. Lots of helpful stuff, and ultimately it will guide you as to which solutions you can safely adopt to comply with what you need to comply with, and minimize the chances of fraud and loss.
Yeah, great, definitely. And we had a little comment here at the end about dealerships usually don't have the people departments focused on risk management, compliance, or KYC, so that might be a good starting point. The only thing I would add there is I think sometimes resources are limited, so it might be, and this is part of the people aspect, is see which people within dealerships might be interested in sort of adding something to their knowledge base or awareness, understanding that could also benefit them in their careers, or if the resources are there, obviously go out and look for those types of people to hire. But I know that's not always the case. So, all right, I think we are pretty much wrapped up, and I know we're 1 minute over, so we're not too bad on time. At least we're not like 20 minutes over.
Yeah.
Anything else from you guys as closing thoughts? I know, Lee, you had your take one thing away, go to that website. How about you, Polkit?
Yeah, I was gonna say, if there's one thing that I'll take away from today, is the fraud is no longer an edge case. It's not just one-off, it's organized, it's scalable, and it's persistent. And the good part of that is all the tools that are in place, we have those tools to be able to combat that. And I think as we advance over the next few years, we are gonna see something to what I said before, alternative data being used. It's going to be combinations of ID verifications with credit data, with data from the lenders. We all have to come together to fight fraud, but fraud is here to stay. And the big message is going to be really for dealerships to invest in tools, peoples, and processes to be able to overcome fraud.